Reading, fuckface.
That headdress goes really well with your privilege.
You're fucking a white male!
Social justice warriors. SJWs. Whether they're whining about heteronormativity, cultural appropriation, the patriarchy, or white privilege, these obnoxious bastards are just the worst. Anyone who has spent any time on the internet or on a college campus will tell you that interacting with SJWs is a fucking nightmare. For many of us, myself included, our interest in internet politics was motivated by our distaste for social justice warriors and everything they stand for. So much has been said about SJWs, why their beliefs are wrong, and how just downright hateful they are, that there's not much more that I can say. What I want to do is answer, what exactly is a social justice warrior? What caused this phenomena? And what role do they really play in our world? Generally, a social justice warrior can be defined as someone with socially progressive views who aggressively engages in political discourse in defense of social justice. This term came into common usage on the internet back in 2014 during the Gamergate controversy. Since then, SJWs have become a running joke for internet subculture, with countless memes satirizing their stupidity. The stereotypical image of a social justice warrior is a overweight, purple-haired cow with a gender studies degree living off of unemployment checks. SJWs are often associated with feminism, BLM, and the now infamous anarcho-communist group Antifa. Antifa has especially become a target of the anti-SJW community online, since they seem to be the embodiment of the social justice warrior turned violent. Antifa has taken social justice from safe spaces and Tumblr to the violent street protests to suppress free speech. I myself have actually encountered Antifa in person. A while back, I attended a protest against the government of my country. It attracted a wide range of characters, and in response to some of the individuals that attended, Antifa launched a counter-protest. They showed up with their air horns and megaphones and their usual chants of fascist this, fascist that. A few arrests were made on both sides, but the police did a good job of keeping peace for the most part. But as I stood there listening to people scream, "No platforms for fascists!" at me through a megaphone, I thought to myself, why are so-called anarcho-communists so determined to shut down people in defense of the government? Aren't anarcho-communists opposed to the very concept of government? Sure, the political differences between me and Antifa are apparent, but wouldn't it be a much better use of their time to protest the people actually in power? Not a group of people with no real political power only associated by their opposition to the current government? Then I remembered that this wasn't the first time they've done this. When the Brexit referendum was won by the Leave vote, Antifa protested the result. That's right, supposed communists fighting in favor of the EU, a continental economic and political union with free trade, a single currency, a centralized parliament, and a centralized bank. I've read Karl Marx, and I got the impression he'd be against that kind of thing. Take a look at how the media has portrayed Antifa. Here's a CNN headline: "Activists seek peace through violence," as if that were something noble. Here's another one from CBC in which they try to justify Antifa's violent shutdown of right-wing speech. They even cite Professor George Ciccarello-Maher, who's infamous for tweeting this: "All I want for Christmas is white genocide." Yeah. So why is it that Antifa, a supposedly revolutionary communist group, seems to defend many powerful institutions in a supposedly oppressive society, and why do so many mainstream voices either sympathize with them or outright support them? It is because Antifa and social justice warriors are not revolutionary at all. They are not against the status quo. They are the vanguard of the status quo. Going back to the definition of an SJW, they are radical progressives. Progressivism views all individuals in society as identical, meaning that any disparity between groups is the result of oppression. Progressivism sees society in terms of oppressed and oppressor, and seeks to enforce equality through the removal of the oppressor in the favor of the oppressed. Over the past 5 decades, as traditional values have declined, Western society has increasingly accepted progressive values and the progressive view of good. As the name would suggest, progressivism needs something to progress towards, equality. For it to sustain itself, progressivism needs inequalities to fight against. SJWs are just the next logical step for progressivism, because once you view society in terms of oppressor and oppressed, things like cultural appropriation and ideas that hurt people's feelings seem like oppression. How do I know that society has embraced progressive values? Well, let me ask you this. Why is it that there's so much frustration on the internet with SJWs? Is it just because their ideas are dumb? If that were the case, I think people would simply ignore them or just laugh at them. But it's not. It's because social justice warriors are getting their way. Going back to the stereotype that all SJWs are unemployed gender studies majors, this has been the premise of many internet memes, but it just isn't true. Radical progressives have permeated society to the extent that they hold enormous institutional power. Sure, the unemployed purple-haired feminists are many, but there are the professors that educated them, the editors of BuzzFeed and Huffington Post that they get their news from, and the progressive politicians that they vote for. It's no secret that postmodernism has infested academia for decades now, and universities have become a breeding ground for SJWs. I'm not saying anything new by pointing out that progressives dominate academia. When I was at school, I had to go through those painful social justice lectures too. But I thought that it was just for losers and that once these people go into the real world, they'll snap out of it. Now I realize how wrong I was. Radical progressives have huge influence in the media, entertainment, corporations, and in the governments. What started in academia decades ago has now branched out and taken over the mainstream culture in most of the Western world. I've heard Sargon of Akkad and Jordan Peterson both say that SJWs are opposed to Western civilization. I have to disagree that they are very much in favor of the current state of Western civilization where progressivism and critical theory reign supreme. You know that chubby girl that you had to do a group project with in your grade 11 English class? Who you haven't spoken to since high school, but just never got around to deleting from your social media. You know how every now and then she'll share a video from BuzzFeed or Mike.com telling you about white privilege or cultural appropriation or some shit like that? Well, let's look at who's drilling this SJW nonsense into her head. MTV is owned by Viacom, a company with a net equity of $4.5 billion. This multi-billion-dollar company is funding shows like MTV Decoded, which released this.
White trash and about white privilege for white people of white privilege and white trash a white for whites white people for white people in white for white people white trash for whites white trash with real white people for white people and white servants for white people for whites white trash and rich white people for white people are white.
BuzzFeed, which released this.
Oh, sorry. I didn't know that white people were the authority on what Native Americans look like.
Has a net worth of $1.5 billion. How about Mike.com, a company that released the video 12 Types of Allies?
I had no idea our country was so racist. Why didn't you tell me?
Trust me, it sucks. Mike.com raised $52 million in its first 6 years of operation. It's not some unemployed gender studies major churning out this propaganda. It's multi-billion-dollar corporations. How about in entertainment? Just look at some recent releases from Marvel Comics. They put out this, and this, and this. These aren't from Tumblr. They're from the biggest publisher of comic books in the world. How about that horrible Dear White People show or that cringe fest Bill Nye series on Netflix? These productions cost millions to make, not to mention the countless SJW multimillionaires and actors and musicians. Even governments now have given in to the demands of social justice warriors. For example, in Britain now you can get arrested for Islamophobic tweets. Also in Britain, there's a move to allow children in elementary school to choose their so-called gender identity before they have even reached the age where they can choose their own bedtime. We joke about this stuff online all the time, but many governments have taken the ideas of SJWs seriously. Social justice is so well funded because it reflects the mainstream progressive culture. So what really is a social justice warrior? They are a defender of the progressive stack which dominates the mainstream culture in the West. Their role is to prevent any differing ideas from entering the political arena to uphold the establishment. One thing everyone points out is how SJWs are against free speech. Well, the Bolsheviks were not against free speech before the Russian Revolution. The Jacobins were not against free speech while Louis was still the King of France. Make no mistake, progressives are very much in control of the narrative, and the purpose of SJWs is to keep it that way. So what can we do? First of all, we have to acknowledge that progressivism is very much in control of the culture. We have to understand that they aren't going away without a fight. They will do whatever they can to hold on to their position of power. It will take a lot more than an election to remove progressivism as the dominant cultural force. Secondly, we need to understand that anti-SJWs, like Paul Joseph Watson has said, are the counterculture. Conservatives, traditionalists, libertarians, nationalists, and even disaffected classical liberals, we are the counterculture. We are the ones pushing for change. We do not want to preserve the current culture, but create a new one. Lastly, know your enemy. Understand postmodernism and the ideology of SJWs and learn how to deconstruct it. Learn how to expose their flawed worldview for what it is. Once you've discredited them, you must present an alternative worldview as a replacement for the progressive establishment. People want something to believe in, so we can't only discredit progressivism, we need to present them a new way to look at the world. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and follow me on Twitter, link in the description. Thank you for listening. Till next time, Endeavor.